This is Michael Andrews, and you're watching Geo Vanguard. Today's episode tackles a question that could decide the fate of the global economy, regional stability, and perhaps the future of international order itself. The next step of the USA versus Iran war. Will common sense prevail? For weeks now, the confrontation between the United States and Iran has escalated step by step, strike by strike, statement by statement. What began as a sharp exchange of threats and targeted attacks has now turned into a crisis centered on one narrow but absolutely vital waterway, the Strait of Hormuz. If the next wave of escalation goes wrong, the impact will not be limited to Washington or Tehran. It will hit fuel prices, shipping routes, food supplies, and jobs across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. In this video, we will explore how we reach this point, what is really at stake in the Strait of Hormuz, why many countries are refusing to send their navies into this crisis, and whether there is still a realistic off-ramp to avoid a global catastrophe. Stay with me until the end, because we're not just going to talk about danger and escalation. We're also going to look at the rational choices still available if leaders decide that common sense is more important than ego, domestic politics, or geopolitical fantasies. Let's start with the pivot point of this entire confrontation, the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow choke point between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, and on any normal day, around 1/5 of all globally traded crude oil flows through this corridor, along with large volumes of liquefied natural gas and critical fertilizer exports. Now imagine that passage slowing down and then effectively being declared closed for normal commercial shipping as war expands across the region. That is not a minor disruption. That is the financial bloodstream of the world suddenly constricting. In this conflict, there is a harsh, simple equation. If Iran manages to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed or heavily disrupted for a long period, Tehran can claim a form of strategic victory because it has proven it can strike at the core of the global economy. If the United States manages to force the strait open and maintain shipping at scale without absorbing devastating losses, Washington can claim that it has neutralized Iran's most powerful leverage. Right now, neither side has been able to achieve a clean, decisive outcome. The strait is not formally blocked in every direction forever, but the risk of attack is so high that much of the usual oil and gas traffic has either slowed dramatically or stopped altogether. Insurance premiums for ships have surged. Some companies have rerouted cargoes through alternative pipelines, and others are simply waiting, losing millions every day. This is why many analysts say that trying to open the Strait of Hormuz purely by force, by sending in large naval formations and ground troops, and daring Iran to attack, would be close to suicidal. You might temporarily escort a few tankers through, but if missiles, drones, and naval mines start claiming ships and lives, the political and economic costs would be enormous. The United States still has the most powerful navy on Earth by tonnage and global reach. It has carrier strike groups, nuclear submarines, and advanced surveillance systems. But even a powerful navy is not immune to saturation attacks from missiles and drones launched from coastlines, islands, and mobile platforms. And very importantly, nobody in Washington wants to see images of burning aircraft carriers or dozens of body bags returning home on nightly news. So the United States faces a dilemma. If it does too little, it looks weak and unable to guarantee freedom of navigation. If it does too much militarily, it risks a regional firestorm that could drag in more actors, hundreds of casualties, and a global recession triggered by exploding energy prices. In the middle of this crisis, Washington has been pressing its allies to join a naval coalition to secure the Strait of Hormuz. President Donald Trump has publicly criticized partners in Europe and Asia, saying that countries who depend on Gulf oil should send their own ships and share the burden of keeping the strait open. But when this call went out, the response from many capitals was cool at best, and in some cases flatly negative. Leaders in key European countries have made it clear that they do not see this conflict as a NATO war, nor are they eager to place their sailors in the line of fire for a strategy they did not design and an escalation they did not initiate. Some governments have argued that sending a couple of frigates or destroyers into an already tense, heavily weaponized zone will not fundamentally change the balance of power. It might, however, increase the number of potential targets and raise the risk of miscalculation, where a single missile or misidentified radar signature could drag an entire country into war. Other states have taken a more cautious, wait-and-see approach. They are watching diplomatic channels, the battlefield, and the economic data before committing to any military deployment. Some of them are saying openly that diplomacy is the only sustainable way to address the Hormuz crisis, because using brute force to reopen a choke point guarded by a regional power is a recipe for massive losses and long-term instability. This hesitation is not just about fear. It is also about legitimacy, strategy, and responsibility. For many countries, this conflict is primarily the result of a prolonged confrontation between the United States, Israel, and Iran, built on years of sanctions, covert operations, and regional power competition. They ask, why should their navies be sacrificed for a war they did not choose, especially when their own economies are already under pressure from inflation and slow growth? The economic stakes, however, are universal. With the Strait of Hormuz heavily disrupted, oil prices have surged, moving toward or beyond levels that the world has not seen in years. Liquefied natural gas prices in key Asian markets have more than doubled, and fertilizer supplies, crucial for agriculture in many developing countries, are facing severe bottlenecks. These are not abstract numbers. Higher energy costs feed directly into higher transport costs, higher food prices, and higher production costs for almost everything from plastics to steel. The International Monetary Fund has warned that sustained spikes in oil prices of this magnitude can shave significant fractions off global growth while pushing inflation higher, hitting both advanced and developing economies. If the war escalates further, if major oil and gas facilities on key islands or coastal hubs are severely damaged, the situation could become much worse. We would not only be talking about the difficulty of transporting energy, we would also be facing a reduction in actual production capacity, meaning there simply isn't enough supply to meet demand for months or even years. In that scenario, global markets would not just be jittery, they would be in full-blown crisis mode with stagflation risk, low growth or recession combined with high inflation. Stock markets in exposed regions could see steep declines, real estate and tourism in Gulf states would struggle, and countries heavily dependent on imported energy would confront serious budgetary and social pressures. So the world is tightly interconnected in this crisis. Oil and gas flow from the Gulf to power plants, factories, and vehicles in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Food, industrial goods, and technology flow back into the region. Disrupt one side of this chain for long enough, and the shockwaves are felt everywhere. That raises an obvious question. If the costs are so high, why has the conflict spiraled to this point in the first place? To understand this, we need to look at the timeline of escalation between the United States, Israel, and Iran. In recent years, tensions have flared repeatedly over Iran's nuclear program, its missile capabilities, and its support for armed groups around the region. There have been cyber attacks, sabotage campaigns, targeted killings, and airstrikes on both sides. Each round of escalation has been followed by intense diplomatic efforts, but lasting agreements have remained elusive. A key turning point came when Israel launched major airstrikes on Iranian nuclear and military sites during delicate diplomatic talks, prompting a barrage of Iranian missiles and drones against Israeli cities. The United States then carried out its own strikes against Iran's nuclear infrastructure, claiming to have significantly weakened Tehran's program but not destroyed it. These episodes set the stage for the current war. When new negotiations failed to produce a breakthrough, Washington and Tel Aviv opted for more force, and Iran responded with a broader campaign of missile and drone attacks across the region, including against bases and radar systems linked to the United States. As the war expanded, Iran declared that it would treat the Strait of Hormuz as a zone of confrontation. Iranian forces harassed or attacked ships, laid mines, and used anti-ship missiles to make passage increasingly risky. The message was clear. If Iran is struck at home, it can strike at the world's economic arteries. Washington has tried to project confidence. U.S. officials have called Iran's closure of the strait an act of desperation, insisting that they will ultimately restore safe passage and that there is no need for concern. But every day that the strait remains largely unusable for normal trade undermines that message and increases pressure on policymakers. At the same time, the United States has launched large-scale attacks on strategic facilities, including Iranian military positions on key islands used for oil export operations. These operations have targeted naval mine depots, missile sites, and command structures in an attempt to degrade Iran's capacity to threaten shipping. Yet Iran's missile and drone launches across the region have continued. This brings us to a critical point. Even as missiles fly, diplomacy has not entirely stopped. There have been high-level talks in neutral venues mediated by regional and global players, focusing on nuclear issues, missile limitations, and de-escalation measures. So far, these talks have produced pauses and partial understandings, but not a durable settlement. Right now, many observers believe that back-channel diplomacy is more active than ever. Governments rarely advertise these conversations while the bombs are falling, but history shows that the most important compromises often begin in private, not in front of cameras. The question is whether these channels can overcome the distrust, domestic pressures, and maximalist demands on all sides. Iran's leadership has laid out broad conditions for ending the war. These include recognition of what Tehran describes as its legitimate rights, whether in terms of nuclear energy, regional security role, or protection against future attacks, and credible guarantees against renewed aggression. On the other side, the United States and its partners argue that Iran's missile program and its support for armed groups across the region are destabilizing and must be constrained as part of any deal. This clash of visions is at the heart of why talks break down. One side demands recognition and security, the other demands restrictions and assurances. Meanwhile, other global powers are stepping into the diplomatic vacuum. Russia has cultivated close ties with several regional governments and has positioned itself as a broker that can speak to all sides. China, a major buyer of Gulf oil, has hosted and mediated talks in the past between rivals and continues to engage foreign ministers across the region. These countries have strong incentives to prevent a total breakdown in the Strait of Hormuz. A prolonged shock to oil and gas supplies would hit their economies hard, especially energy-intensive industries and export sectors. At the same time, they see an opportunity to showcase an alternative diplomatic approach, one that emphasizes negotiation over interventionism. For the Gulf monarchies and nearby states, the stakes are existential in a different sense. Over decades, many of them have built reputations as stable, open hubs for finance, tourism, and trade. If they become perceived as permanent war zones or prime targets in a great power confrontation, investment can flee, tourism can collapse, and expatriate workers can start looking for safer destinations. We are already seeing signs of economic stress. Stock markets in some regional financial centers have suffered double-digit declines. Real estate valuations have been marked down, and corporate offices linked to Western firms have reportedly reviewed their exposure and security plans. A long war threatens to erode years of brand building and infrastructure investment. This is why more and more voices in the region are talking about the need for a new security architecture that does not depend entirely on foreign bases and external military guarantees. The idea is not simple isolationism, but a regional dialogue where neighbors, even if they disagree, accept that perpetual escalation and proxy wars are a dead end. The core question of this video is, will common sense prevail? To answer that, we need to think about what common sense would look like for the main actors involved. For the United States, common sense means recognizing that there is no purely military solution to the Strait of Hormuz crisis. Even if it could destroy many of Iran's launchers and bases, the cost in lives, equipment, and global economic damage would be immense. A strategy that combines measured deterrence with serious diplomacy offers a better chance of securing shipping without sliding into a wider war. For Iran, common sense means understanding that while closing Hormuz gives it leverage, pushing the world into a deep economic crisis could ultimately shrink its own revenue and isolate it further. A controlled escalation that brings others to the negotiating table is one thing. A spiral that turns long-term partners and buyers into angry, struggling economies is another. For regional states, common sense means setting aside short-term rivalries to focus on collective collective survival. The message to all external powers should be clear. This region cannot be treated as a battlefield without consequences for everyone involved. Regional leaders can use their leverage, ports, airspace, financial links, energy supplies, to encourage de-escalation and dialogue. For the wider international community, common sense means resisting the temptation to frame this crisis purely as a contest of strength or a test of loyalty to one side. Instead, governments should focus on concrete objectives: restoring safe navigation, stabilizing energy markets, protecting civilians, and establishing mechanisms to prevent similar crises in the future. So what might a realistic off-ramp actually look like? Picture a sequence of steps, imperfect, fragile, but better than the alternatives. First, a limited ceasefire around key maritime zones, brokered by neutral intermediaries and backed by clear verification mechanisms. This would not require immediate trust, only a shared interest in avoiding direct clashes at sea that could sink ships and trigger uncontrolled escalation. Second, humanitarian and economic measures to stabilize the most vulnerable areas. That could include coordinated releases from strategic oil reserves, temporary waivers on certain sanctions to allow energy and medical supplies to flow, and international support for countries hardest hit by price spikes. Third, a structured diplomatic process that goes beyond emergency crisis management. This would need to address the underlying issues: Iran's nuclear program, its missile arsenal, the presence of foreign forces in the region, and security guarantees for all sides. It would be complex, contentious, and slow, but without it, any ceasefire is just a pause before the next storm. Fourth, a broader conversation about global energy security. The world's dependence on a few choke points like the Strait of Hormuz makes it vulnerable to shocks, whether from war, terrorism, or accidents. Diversifying energy sources, routes, and technologies is not a luxury. It is a strategic necessity. Now, none of this will happen automatically. It requires leaders to accept short-term political costs at home, admitting that previous strategies failed, compromising with rivals, and avoiding the temptation of easy victories sold through aggressive rhetoric. But the cost of inaction, or of blindly pushing ahead with maximalist goals, could be far higher for their own citizens. We should also be honest. There are always spoilers. There will be voices arguing that any compromise is weakness, that only total victory is acceptable, that diplomacy is a trap. But in a world of long-range missiles, cyber attacks, and fragile economies, total victory often turns into mutual harm. So where does this leave us? We are in a moment where the next step, just one more round of strikes, one more attempt to teach a lesson, one more miscalculated show of strength, could trigger repercussions that no one can fully control. Yet we are also in a moment where the tools for de-escalation exist. Diplomatic channels are open, regional actors are learning the hard way that their stability is at risk, and major powers outside the immediate conflict have strong incentives to push for a settlement. In situations like this, common sense is not a slogan. It is a series of very specific decisions: to pause instead of escalate, to invite mediation instead of dismissing it, to think about the livelihoods of millions rather than the applause of a narrow political base. As viewers, we often feel powerless watching these events unfold. But understanding the dynamics, the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, the economic chain reactions, the diplomatic possibilities, helps us see that war is not some unstoppable natural force. It is the product of human choices, and human choices can change. Before we close, let's briefly visualize two possible futures. In the first, escalation continues. The United States intensifies strikes on coastal and island facilities. Iran responds with more attacks on ships and infrastructure. Allies get drawn in reluctantly. Oil surges far past current levels, and the world tips toward a global recession with rising prices and rising anger. In the second, pressure from global markets, citizens, and international partners pushes leaders to step back. A fragile ceasefire is agreed. Limited shipping resumes under heavy protection. Energy prices stabilize, even if at a higher baseline, and negotiated frameworks begin to slowly tackle the root causes of the confrontation. Neither path is easy, but one path leads to a cycle of destruction and rebuilding that could last years, while the other at least offers a chance to protect lives, economies, and the possibility of a more stable regional order. As of today, we are somewhere between those two futures. The Strait of Hormuz is not fully open, nor fully blockaded without contest. The war has not exploded into a world-spanning conflict, but it has already shaken global markets and shaken public confidence in the security of critical trade routes. The next step, what happens in the coming days and weeks, will tell us whether common sense can still prevail over momentum, pride, and fear. It will tell us whether our international system is capable of absorbing a shock like this and learning from it, or whether we are doomed to repeat the same patterns with even higher stakes. As you listen to these words, I want you to imagine them not as a distant commentary, but as a description of the world you live in and depend on every day. The fuel in your car or bus, the electricity in your home, the price of food in your local market. These are connected to that narrow strait thousands of kilometers away. So when we ask, will common sense prevail? We're not just talking about abstract geopolitics. We're asking whether the people who hold power understand how deeply their decisions affect ordinary lives, and whether they will act accordingly. This has been Michael Andrews on Geo Vanguard. If you found this analysis helpful, share it with someone who wants to see beyond headlines and slogans, and who cares about how these global decisions ripple into everyday reality. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay critical. Because in the end, common sense in politics often starts with common sense among citizens. People like you, who refuse to accept that endless escalation is the only option. Thank you for watching Geo Vanguard. I'm Michael Andrews, and I'll see you in the next episode.